The Messiah has come to save. He has come to save his people from their deeper peril and their greater foe. He has come to deal with the problem of guilt before God, the problem of sin, the problem of death. He has come to die in the place of sinners so that forgiveness might be offered to a guilty people, so that life might be extended to a dying people.
Welcome to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths. I'm Steve Hiller, and glad that you've joined us today as we begin a series called The Darkness Before the Dawn. And Jonathan, as we've already heard, we're going to look at the death of Jesus. But why did Jesus have to die? I mean, why couldn't Jesus, since he was God, simply have shown up and said, no, I'm going to grant you the forgiveness of sin? Why did he have to go to the cross and lay down his life?
A key component of our understanding of the message of Easter and the message of the cross of Christ is the justice of God. If we don't have a pretty robust understanding of the fact that God is a God of justice, then none of this will make any sense to us at all, because we'll say, well, why doesn't God just declare us forgiven because he loves us? But the Bible says that God is committed to justice, so that wrongdoing will be addressed and dealt with and will be punished. And actually, when we think about that, that's very reassuring that the God of all the universe is committed to justice, because we all want to see justice done for evil acts and evil behavior. We need to believe that justice will be done. But as we cling to a hope of justice, we have to recognize that we are guilty ourselves. And that's where the cross comes in, because God says that he will offer forgiveness to a people who don't deserve it, a people like you and a people like me, but he will do so through the payment of the price of our sin. He will ensure that justice is satisfied. And so he comes in the person of his Son. God comes to us and pays the price himself, that the just demands of a holy God are met and satisfied in full. And that's the wonder and the beauty of the cross of Christ.
Well, let's continue to look at that together. Mark chapter 11 is where we are today. Grab a Bible and meet us there as we look at the first 11 verses of that chapter in a message called A Day of Promise. Here is Jonathan.
I guess we all know the experience of seeing and observing a story that begins in a very promising and a very positive way and then ends in a very, very different way. A new relationship, a new partnership, a trip, a journey, a new job. The introduction, the commencement, the beginning, it's full of promise. It is full of warmth, of interaction. Things go really smoothly at the start, but then before too long, it all takes a very, very different turn. Here in Mark chapter 11, Jesus approaches the great city of Jerusalem, the royal city, and he comes to the final segment of his earthly ministry. This time now, these days, they are set to be pivotal and significant. We know that. His entry into the royal city is rich with symbolism. It is warm with welcome. It is full of promise. The scene as he is greeted there on the road, it's quite lovely. This is sometimes referred to as the triumphal entry. You'll probably see that heading in your Bible. And it is, of course, triumphal. But this entry to the city of Jerusalem amidst joy and welcome, it will give way to something far different before too many hours and days go by. Here, as we come to Jerusalem and to the final portion of the earthly ministry of Jesus, we do come to the very heart of his mission, of course. And we come to the central focus now of his saving work. It's interesting just to note that in Mark's account, we are only 2/3 of the way into his gospel, chapter 11 out of 16. But we are now in the final days of Jesus' earthly life and ministry. And so fully 1/3 of Mark's book will be given over to this pivotal time and to these crucial events. One scholar famously commented that Mark's gospel really is a passion narrative with an extended introduction. That is, his book is primarily and centrally an account of the passion of the Christ, the events of his self-offering, his suffering and his death, with an introduction to those events in the rest of his life and teaching and ministry. And I think there is something to that observation. I think there is an insight there that's quite significant. You see, everything has been leading up to this. Everything has been paving the way to Jerusalem. Everything has been about Jesus' arrival there. Everything has been about the events which are to unfold before our eyes. Jesus and his disciples, they are on the road, as they often were on the road. Jesus has been teaching. Jesus has been healing. He has been performing miracles. Most recently, he has given sight to blind Bartimaeus, and this man with new sight has begun to follow Jesus on the way. But now Jesus and his followers, they approach Jerusalem. They're no doubt in town for the Passover feast and celebration, the time when the Lord's great deliverance of his people from bondage and slavery is remembered with solemnity and with thanksgiving. They're drawing closer. They're at the nearby communities of Bethpage and Bethany. The Mount of Olives is before them, just east of the city across the Kidron Valley, overlooking the great temple. And so now Jesus and his followers, they approach the city. This will be the final destination, the final stop in the ministry journey. What are we to see here in these events that Mark records for us? These events so clearly pivotal in the story of Jesus, clearly so central in the drama of Easter. What are we being taught in these verses? What are we being shown? What would Mark have us see and understand of the person and work of Jesus Christ? Well, in the first instance, Mark is showing us very carefully that this is a symbolic royal entry. Here we are observing a symbolic royal entry to the royal city. He wants us to see that Jesus enters this royal city as the royal son, as the promised Messiah, as the coming king. Of course, on a day yet to come, Jesus will return in glory. This is not the final arrival of the king in his splendor, but it is a royal arrival nonetheless. Notice the details with me again, verse 1. Now, when they drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethpage and to Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has ever sat." I guess we've all had the experience of visiting someone on their home turf, in the place which they know, the place which belongs to them. Maybe it's during college or university days, and you make a new friend who lives in another city, and one summer break, one Thanksgiving weekend, you go with them to their home. And as you travel with them and enter their region and drive into their town, you sense immediately, yes, I am on their turf. They're pointing things out to you. They're anticipating the next bend in the road. They're telling you about who lives in that house and what happens over there in that place. And you are very much the passenger, and they are very much in control. I'm sure that the disciples had visited Jerusalem before now, but as they approach the royal city as followers of the royal son, suddenly it becomes clear that they are entering his special territory, his region, his city. He is firmly in control now of the events as they unfold. He's the local expert because, of course, he is the royal Lord. As they travel down the dusty road and the Mount of Olives rises before them, Jesus takes aside two of the disciples and he says, "You see that village before you? Walk on ahead. As you enter it, you're going to see a colt tied by a door, perhaps to a tree or a post. I can tell you, no one has ever sat on this colt, and that means it's fit for a king. It's fit for holy use as well. It's just right for the Messiah. Just go and untie it. Bring it here." Someone might raise a question, but if they do, tell them this simple truth: the Lord has need of it. I was a little amused in my preparation for today to read in a number of commentaries the suggestion that maybe the whole thing with the colt was, prearranged. Jesus' event manager had emailed ahead to the local Hertz or Avis and booked a colt from the Bethany office for a 4 p.m. pickup. Do you need GPS or a second driver added? No, thanks. We just need to make sure it's a brand new one, please. No mileage on the clock. Well, maybe. I don't think so. I don't think that Mark here is highlighting the organizational and planning capabilities of the disciples or of Jesus himself. No, he is pointing us to the divine authority, isn't he, of Jesus Christ. He is highlighting the omniscience of the Lord. You see, Jesus knew precisely where that colt would be tied because he knows everything. The Messiah who enters Jerusalem is none other than the Lord of heaven above, who now needs this colt and who has every right to use it because he is the Lord of all. And so, of course, things do play out precisely as Jesus has predicted, verse 4. And they went away and found a colt tied at a door outside in the street, and they untied it. And some of those standing there said to them, "What are you doing untying the colt?" And they told them what Jesus had said, and they let them go. And they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks on it, and he sat on it. It was an ancient convention that a visiting king could make use of an animal as needed. He could simply call upon the owner, call upon his subject, of course, to make the animal available for his use. To be fit for royal use, the animal must never have been ridden. And so here is the Lord's promised king, his Messiah, making use of the privilege that is rightly his as he enters his royal city. Now, doing this was itself a fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. The Lord's king, the Old Testament had told us, would arrive in his city in just this fashion. Zechariah 9 and verse 9, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you, says the prophet. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." You see, the choice of this mode of transportation, it was not a random thing. The decision to find a colt to ride for this final brief leg of a long journey, it was not because Jesus was tired of walking. That's not what's going on here. After all, think about it. Jesus walked everywhere in his ministry. He's always walking, and it's not that now he has suddenly become tired. No, it is that the Lord's king was long promised, long predicted to enter his royal city in this way. You see, Jesus is making a statement. He is making a declaration of who he is.
You're listening to Encounter the Truth with Jonathan Griffiths and a message called A Day of Promise. It is part of our series, The Darkness Before the Dawn. And while we're going to pause right here, I hope you'll stay with us because we'll get back to the message in just a moment. Well, if you ever miss a broadcast, come and listen online. Our website is encounterthetruth.org. There you can stream the program or download an MP3 for free. Again, that's at encounterthetruth.org. And when you're there, I hope you'll check out our weekly e-devotional. Sign up for our newsletter, and you'll find links there to social media. It's a great way to stay connected with the ministry. One other way, go to our YouTube channel and like and subscribe. That way you'll be updated anytime we post new content on the YouTube channel. Again, simply look for Encounter the Truth when you're on YouTube, or we'll link you to that through the website, encounterthetruth.org. Let's get back to the message. Again, here is Jonathan.
Here in Ottawa, of course, we have recent memory of a rather grand arrival of a head of state. When the President of the United States came to town for a visit to see our Prime Minister, the media were careful, weren't they, to capture the images of Air Force One landing at our airport. Large numbers of law enforcement agents were put on standby. Supplementary officers were brought in from jurisdictions hours away. Many watched the motorcade of dozens of cars, including that lumbering and heavily armored Cadillac limousine, affectionately known as the Beast, wind its way through town, stop at Parliament for the President's address to the House of Commons, then make its way to the gala dinner where the great and the good welcomed the President and the First Lady on a red carpet and dined together in style. A powerful leader deserves a grand welcome and should make a conspicuous entry. Well, Jesus' entry to Jerusalem didn't involve a modified jumbo jet or an armored limousine or hundreds of police officers. It didn't involve grandeur or luxury, but it did involve symbol. And it did involve significance, and we mustn't miss the meaning of it. Jesus is indicating, and Mark is telling us, that Jesus has indeed come as the long-awaited Messiah, the promised King and the Savior. The symbolism makes that clear. He comes in authority. But the manner of this coming, the way in which his authority is expressed, it is actually nothing like what people expected. You see, they were waiting for an impressive military leader, a forceful political power to sweep into Jerusalem and to take the reins of the authority of state, to marshal the troops, to confront Rome, all of which would lead to Israel's glory on the world stage. That's the Messiah, you see, that people were looking for. That's the Messiah who was widely expected. But when Jesus came to the royal city, he came in authority. He set his agenda for the arrival. He knew precisely how things would play out, but he came not at the head of an army, but on the back of a colt, accompanied by a band of rather ragtag disciples. And the symbolic but surprising nature of the arrival, an arrival that defies so much expectation but carries so much meaning, it forces everyone who encounters Jesus Christ to reckon carefully with him. To reckon carefully with who he is and with what it is that he has come to do. The surprising manner of Jesus' entry, the simplicity of it, the humility of it, the lack of grandeur and the lack of fanfare, it's a powerful signal to us that his work as Messiah, at least in this arrival as he first comes, his work will not be of the kind expected by many people. Now, of course, you and I, we know where this story is going. You and I know that within a very short space of time, this Messiah will pray in anguish in Gethsemane, actually on the slopes of the Mount of Olives, under the shadow of which he now walks. He will be led away from there by soldiers. He will stand trial before religious leaders and Roman authorities. He will carry his cross to Calvary, and there he will die. The Messiah has come to save, but not from Israel's military and political foes. He has come to save his people from their deeper peril and their greater foe. He has come to address the spiritual need of the people. He has come to deal with the problem of guilt before God, the problem of sin, the problem of death. He has come to die in the place of sinners so that forgiveness might be offered to a guilty people, so that life might be extended to a dying people. This is actually the salvation that Israel needed, even though many didn't see it. And this is actually the salvation that you need and that I need, even though some might not recognize it. Mark shows us first a symbolic royal entry. Next, he shows us a mixed royal reception, a very mixed royal reception. As Jesus now enters the city on this borrowed colt, there is a reception for him. There is a response to his arrival, and it's a lovely response, at least initially. Verse 8, and many spread their cloaks on the road, and others spread leafy branches that they had cut from the fields. And those who went before and those who had followed were shouting, Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. It's important for us to recognize that the whole of Israel was actually waiting for this moment. They were waiting for the Lord's Messiah to come and to rule and to reign in accordance with the promises of old. They knew they needed salvation. They longed to see the glory of Israel restored. They wanted rid of the Romans who ruled over them. They wanted their dignity and their independence restored. They wanted Israel to take its rightful place on the world stage. And for this to happen, they needed the Lord's Messiah to come. In their mind, as we've already said, he would be a great military and political leader. And so they were on the lookout. And the great question surrounding Jesus Christ and his ministry was simply this: is he the promised Messiah? Is he the long-anticipated king? For some on the road that day, the answer was clearly, well, yes, I think so. The answer was clearly yes from the blind man, actually, whom he had healed just before this incident, just ahead of the arrival in Jerusalem, who was now following him along the way. At the end of chapter 10, at verse 47 and verse 48, blind Bartimaeus had repeatedly called out to Jesus as the Son of David, the son of the royal house, the promised king in David's line. You see, despite his physical blindness, he had spiritual insight to see who Jesus was. The answer was a hopeful yes, even if not a fully convinced yes, from those who lined the roadside now, those who shouted Hosanna, those who laid their garments on the ground. They at least hoped that this was he. Now, as an initial response to Jesus the Messiah, to his arrival in the royal city, this isn't too bad, is it? This is, in fact, hugely positive and quite appropriate. We see here the ancient equivalent of rolling out the red carpet for a dignitary, for a king. This first response, it is quite literally a royal welcome for the Lord Jesus. It recalls the welcome actually given to kings of old in Israel. When Jehu was anointed king in Israel, in 2 Kings chapter 8, we read this: Then in haste every man of them took his garment and put it under him on the bare steps, and they blew the trumpet and proclaimed, Jehu is king. You see, that's the force, that's the nature of what is happening here. A group, a crowd, they see this man coming on the colt. They've heard the reports of his teaching, his miracles. They've heard the rumors that this might be the Messiah. And this group is saying, yes, we think he is the Lord's king. We believe he's come to save. Lay down your garments, honor him, smooth his path, treat him as the king should be treated. That's what's going on. They call out blessings upon his name. They declare him to be the one who comes in the name of the Lord. More than that, they declare that in his arrival is the coming of the kingdom in David's line. The heart of messianic expectation set by the promises of old, was that a son of David would indeed come, whose kingdom would be firmly established and then would never end. God had promised that much to David. Back in 2 Samuel chapter 7, a son of his, a descendant of his, would come and be given an everlasting kingdom. And this crowd on the road, on the way into Jerusalem, we don't know how many of them, but they are declaring that they believe that Jesus is the royal son, the descendant of David. And as they cry out to him, they cry out the word Hosanna. Hosanna simply means save. Save now, save today, please. It's expressed as a cry of praise, but it is a call to save. They believe he's the Messiah. They cry out to him, save us, save us. Now again, no doubt, they're thinking in terms that everyone thought in those days. Save us from the Romans. Save us from political and military oppression. Save us from this indignity of being ruled by others. Liberate us, free us, save us. No doubt the expectations were a little bit mixed. No doubt the understanding of the people was a little bit limited, but the welcome was good, wasn't it? Whatever the people knew and meant by their words, they were doing and saying that which was appropriate in welcoming the Lord's Messiah. But the very striking thing about all this, the arresting thing about it, is how quickly the initial response fades. Do you notice that in the text? It's quite remarkable. It's actually quite breathtaking. There is this warmth, there is this enthusiasm, there is this honoring, there is this moment of glory, as it were. And then notice where we find ourselves almost immediately, verse 11. And he entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. God's Messiah, the royal son, the Lord himself, he comes to his city, to his royal city. While he's on the road of approach, there's some noise, there's some enthusiasm. But once he gets into the city proper, the crowds, they quickly disperse, and in fact, they disappear. And once he enters the temple, which is actually built for his worship, it is built for his honor, for he is the Lord of heaven who has now come down. Once he gets there, not a single worshiper is to be found. There is not even a greeter to welcome him. The priests and the leaders of the religious establishment, they're simply not there. They've not come to welcome their king and their Lord. And we soon discover that this is not some oversight. This is not some scheduling error, some grave mistake. No, what this reveals is not merely an indifference to the Christ, shocking as that might be. No, this reveals ultimately a hateful rejection of him. And again, we know where the story soon will go. In no time at all, by the start of chapter 14, this is what we will read. It was now 2 days before the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and the chief priests and the scribes were seeking how to arrest him by stealth and kill him. That's where this is going. The crowds would disappear. Those who formerly followed and welcomed Jesus, they would quickly scatter. Judas would betray Jesus. The disciples would fail him and deny him. Hardly anyone would stand by him. There's an initial response of enthusiasm, but it does not last. And as we observe that and take it in, we are prompted, I think, to ask some very hard questions of ourselves. We are prompted to consider carefully our own response to Jesus, our own response of heart and of life. And I think it's very timely for us to do that at Easter, at this season.
Jonathan Griffiths here on Encounter the Truth and a message called A Day of Promise. Now, we have to pause here, but we'll continue on our next broadcast. Well, if you ever miss a program, come and listen online. Our website is encounterthetruth.org, and we're able to bring you the program on the radio, online, or even through the app because of your generosity. And as you give a gift of any amount this month, we want to say thank you by sending you a book that Jonathan has picked out. It is called The Case for Easter, really tackling the question, did Jesus of Nazareth really rise from the dead? It's written by former investigative journalist Lee Strobel, and we'd love to send you a copy as our way of saying thank you for your financial support. You can find out more or give online at encounterthetruth.org or call us at 833-99-TRUTH. That's 1-833-998-7884 or encounterthetruth.org. You can also write us at Encounter the Truth, 2176 Prince of Wales Drive, Ottawa, Ontario, 2KE0A1. Or in the U.S. at Encounter the Truth, 215 North Arlington Heights Road, number 102, Arlington Heights, Illinois, 60004. For our Bible teacher, Jonathan Griffiths, and our producer, Mark Breda, I'm Steve Hiller. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time.